GLOBIS.
Okay, good morning. I'd like to first thank Hori-san and the GLOBIS team for having us here and hosting, especially hosting this session. We're going to talk about food and sustainability, which is kind of like not the mainstream topic for this whole entire series of sessions, but we're grateful that there's an opportunity here to talk about something that's very important for everyone, and also there's also a business aspect to it as well. So we thank the people who made it happen to have us here. I myself is a foodie, which is not really a profession, but I spent about 4 or 5 months out of the year traveling around the world, eating at the best restaurants in everywhere. So I have visited about 120 countries, and so that's what I do for passion. And through that knowledge and network, I do various things such as organizing food events, culinary meetups, and I advise a few different companies in the sector of food and entertainment. So that's who I am, and I think we don't need detailed introductions, but just to introduce our panelists and their credentials on this particular topic. If I could have a word or two from each of you, that'd be great. Starting from Fumio.
Hi, thank you very much for inviting for these sessions. My name is Fumio Yonezawa. I was born in Japan, and I worked in the restaurant called Janjo's in New York City, and the 5 years, and I opened a Janjo's Tokyo here in Japan, and for my understanding for the food sustainability is in Japan, and especially it's pretty behind for the situation right now if you compare it in other countries, and especially in the US and Europe. And I'm the chef, so I have to use a lot of ingredients, and I'm pretty much focused about for the produce, and for my restaurant is the focus about the meat and the produce, and also I'm the member of the chef for the blue, which is the Hirokura's the representative and the ocean situation for Japan it's bad right now, and what we can do is try to inform this situation right now, and try to not too much using for the bad the less number of the seafood, and also my restaurants, and I like to cooking a lot of the produce, and for the produce of the organic or a natural the methods making for the vegetable is for for the future, it's good for the earth and the natures, and but I like to using the great quality of the products because I'm the chefs, but it's right now, it's maybe last 5 years or something, I realized the situation for everything is not great condition. So I have to focus about the choosing the great the products and try to making good food. So I don't know what I can talk about for a decision, but again we could try to learning a lot of the stuff from everyone or the panelists and for everyone. Thank you very much.
Next we turn to Hiroko.
Okay. I'm Hiroko Sasaki. I'm a food journalist writing about gastronomy, lifestyle, and food culture in the last 20 years or so. And I'm also founder and director of a chefs group called Chefs for the Blue. It's about 30 chefs, top chefs here in Tokyo, learning about seafood sustainability and also educating people about it through many events. Food cart events, dining events, or seminars, talk sessions, and so on. Why I came to found it is that about 3 years ago, I came to have a big assignment about fishery, and I went to see many fishermen and academics in Japan, and I came to know that the fish stock in Japan is in this very serious condition. It's about, the last year, the total catch of fish last year is about 1/3 of the 130 years ago. It's really depleting, and I didn't know anything about it. I was really shocked, and I felt ashamed as well, because I'm a food journalist writing about food, but I didn't know anything about it. So that's why my readers didn't know anything about it, of course, right? So I felt kind of responsible and to do something for that. So I asked my colleague chefs to gather and had a kind of workshops to learn about it, and decided to spread the words to the society. And he is one of the lead chefs in our Chefs for the Blue group, and we're very actively doing lots of things. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And Thomas?
Good afternoon. My name is Thomas. I'm from Germany, and or I would consider myself as the new kid on the block when it comes to the Tokyo food scene. I'm running a restaurant very close by in Idabashi called Inua, which is now been opened for about 14 months. And
it's been selected the best new restaurant, right?
Yes.
Yeah, in the world.
Yes,
yeah.
people say so.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And well, the reason why, in the first case, I came to Japan, this is what a lot of people wondering and asking is, because I think Japan is, when it comes to food, and also Tokyo, like it said already in the introduction, is maybe the food capital of the world. And looking at Japan, what Japan has to offer, it's probably unlike any country, has some of the biggest diversities when it comes to food. Looking at Japan's geography from Okinawa, which is very much subtropical, where you can find rainforests and such as, and you traveling up to Hokkaido, where you suddenly end up in almost Arctic conditions, and the land is frozen for maybe even more than half of the year. I found that extremely interesting, and decided after a pop-up I did with a restaurant from Copenhagen called Noma to come back, because unlike any country I've been, I left Japan at that time with an urge to be a part of it and to understand more about the food culture and about the culture and everything what comes with it.
Okay, great, thanks very much. Well, food sustainability, it's such a broad topic, or it's almost a genre where there are many subtopics, and we would need a whole day or two to discuss everything. And that's actually, by the way, Thomas used to be involved in the event called MAD, headed by Rene Redzepi of Noma, one of the most influential restaurants in the world. There's a session called MAD. It is actually devoted a whole day or two about sustainability. So we don't have the time for that. So we will just focus on aspects that are related to restaurants, so that we could directly tap on their experience and resources. But so first of all, before going into details, we'd like Hiroko, the specialist, the journalist, to give us an overview so we could put things in perspective.
Okay. I don't know how many of you are very familiar to food industry, but you are probably heard that we are going to have 96 billion people by 2050, and we're not going to have enough food to supply them all. And it's impossible to feed them if we continue our current lifestyle. As of today, nearly 3/4 of the ice-free surface of the Earth is already used. And then 70% of the fish stock in the ocean is either fully used, overused, or in crisis. That means we shouldn't go further, right? And another issue is climate change. That has negative effects on agriculture and fishery sectors. The point is that we have only limited resources and exploding population. On the other hand, the global food system has a huge negative impact on the environment. It contributes up to 37% of a greenhouse gas emissions from fertilizer manufacture to packaging, processing companies. According to the United States Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, they just released, info last month in August. So, and chemicals from pesticides and fertilizers used in the conventional agriculture pollute the underwater flows and the rivers and finally oceans. So they have a serious impact on soil and biodiversity loss as well. If we cannot figure out how to feed humans in a more sustainable way, climate change will accelerate, even more accelerate, and make it all harder to make food to supply. Then what can we, as a restaurant industry, or as a part of the whole food sectors, do to help? There's several points I can point out today to discuss about. So in general, number one, in general, food sourcing would be one of the most important options for us. Using organic vegetables and supporting those farmers are definitely sustainable approaches because they reduce greenhouse gas emissions and they don't use any chemicals to ruin the soil, water, and so on. One of the big reasons for soil degradation and desertification happening around the world is from those chemicals heavily used in a commercial and conventional agriculture. Seafood, which is caught or farmed in sustainable method, would be another target. As I mentioned at the beginning, 70% of the seafood is already, in serious condition. Well, the situation in Japan is probably the worst, but the overfishing is the main cause. Number 3, exploring new protein source would be an urgent issue. We are using fish stock at its maximum level, as I told you, and meat production requires vast majority of farmland. It's about 83% of the farmland is used for the cattle or cows and so on. And then 60% of agriculture greenhouse gas emissions is from the meat production. So as a restaurant industry, this is actually a big issue. Number 4, using local produce is favorable too because it doesn't require much food mileage and the carbon footprint that is needed for the long distance distribution for food. Number 5, reducing food waste is also a very big topic, right? Big challenge. About 13 billion out of 50 billion tons of food is wasted every year at the global scale. It's a big portion. One quarter of the food, edible food, I would say, is wasted and burned. And it needs more energy to do it, right? So it's a very big, serious condition. There should be something we can do in the restaurant industry. Number 6, this is the last one. Single-use plastics. This is a big one too. The plastic is not a huge problem, and the plastic pollution affects sea life throughout all the ocean. It's hard not to use it in the private kitchen because it's needed for the hygiene reason, but maybe we can reduce it. So these six topics we could talk about today, I think.
Great, thanks very much. Well, first of all, we'd like to start with I like to take an ingredient-based approach. Like start talking about because there are various ingredients already touched upon, like meat, seafood, and other sources of protein. Like first talk about meat, because for example, Thomas, at your restaurant, there's you don't emphasize meat, or some of the times you just serve vegetables and not much protein, meat-based protein. And what's your view on that?
Well, I think it's you mentioned MAD, and one of the most powerful questions ever raised at MAD, and also to me as a professional chef, is, or was at the time, why don't we eat insects in the Western world? And it's there's a lot to it, because if you look at it, for example, how much livestock does it take to produce 1 kilo of beef? And that is 10 kilos of food to the beef. It's 10 kilos of food gives you 3 kilos of pork and about 5 kilos of chicken. If we were to decide and find a way to make insects more approachable for us to our diet, and also in a more delicious way, 10 kilos of food actually produce 9 kilos of insects, if we were to find, again, a way to make it delicious for us. So from an economical point of view, of course, that would be the easiest solution, but it's in fact the most challenging solution of them all. And that's also, I think, where we as chefs and restaurants come into place, where it's our responsibility to find ways to make those protein sources delicious, and also introduce those protein sources in the most charming and most approachable way, and or even more important, most delicious way to our audience. Having that said, we are using, for example, at some point or some month of the year, we are using grasshoppers. We are also using bees, bee larvae in particular, which to me, if you cook them right and if you treat them right and you poach them very gently, we consider them and call them in our restaurant sea urchin of the forest, because they are as creamy and as fatty, as sweet and as delicious.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. Fumio, you use meat in your restaurants, and is there anything we could do to make it more sustainable?
Yes, my restaurant is like they're serving like a lot of like the beef and the produce. I mean, there's not many the seafood at my restaurants, and like I'm trying to pick the beef is I don't know how do you call it in English, like, but delivered cow. Have you ever heard of the delivered cow? At the back in the day, for like the Wagyu, of course, like males and females, and the females cows, and they keep getting born. And there used to be for the females cow, like it's more than 10 the babies comes out, then they, like throw it away, or like the people doesn't eat the stuff because it's too tough, and it's not like it's really eatable right now. Eatable, so like the female, like all the female cows is not like the eatable for like at the back in the day, but it's right now, but. That the 5 or 6 the babies comes out and they feed again, then now like we can eat it. But it's actually, like for the beef, it's the virgin cow is the most, what do you call?
Well, it's the most expensive. And the
most
praised.
Expensive, and
it's the most tasty.
Yes, that's what the people call. But it's
fact.
Yeah, but it's I don't think it's like
That's what the foodie says.
Yeah, that's what the foodie says. That's true, but it's actually for like aging like a 6 or 7, like 8 years, and the female cows, and after delivers and then the feed again, it's actually tastes really really good. So like I'm trying to using it for like only for the delivered cows in my restaurants, and also like for the pork and the chicken, like guinea fowl, and like I'm trying to like using for like a natural like a method to like the feeding. So that's.
I heard that the delivered cow has more umami because it gets older, right? It has chewy and then hard, but it has more umami. I heard.
Well, it's Well, from a foodie standpoint, it's best for steaks, for example. When you grill it with charcoal or etc., then it's very good.
That's what I do. Like
Right.
for like very simple done by the most of like the steak is like a very high like a high temperature and high heat for like using the binchotan and the grill like a surface and nice and medium rare inside, but and then only the salt and like the homemade mustard to serve at the steak of my restaurant. So that's why I have to focus about like the taste of the the by itself, like a meat, chicken, and the pork. It's tender. Japanese people likes the tenderness, like for like everything's the tender, the fatty. The Japanese likes it, but like he said, if you're eating for the steak, it's like a nice texture. It's not only for the soft. It's a good taste. Give you like a good taste.
Okay. And Thomas, you touched upon other sources of protein, like plant. How about plant-based protein, like so-called artificial meat or fake meat, that kind of thing?
I have not tasted such ingredients yet, because I also think I don't need artificial meat based on plant protein to make plants delicious. I think
see.
it's much more challenging to come up with a vegetarian dish, but make it as interesting to our guest or to any audience as a piece of meat. And in fact, I also believe that actually, if we were to discover the plant kingdom even more, the diversity in flavors and textures is much higher than just looking very purely at any given protein.
Right.
And we're not even having started diving into the oceans, because when people talk about seafood, it's always your fish and it's always your ebbies and such as things. But in fact, if you were to dive a little bit and look, seafood is also sea vegetables. And Japan, again, has some of the most diverse varieties of seaweeds in the entire world, because not only that Japan is an island, it also faces two different waters, and it has its complete diversity, again, within the climates and temperatures of subtropical to all the way up to Hokkaido, where the sea is almost frozen.
Right, great. What do you think, Fumio, about these alternate sources of protein?
Right now, like I have the choice to I don't have to use the basically like the soy meat or like the kind of the things. The most of the people eating the soy meat is for like a vegan and the vegetarian people, because they can eat the animal proteins, right? So like I'm cooking like a lot of the vegan and the vegetarian dish at my restaurants, and I'm trying to focus to like eating the actual vegetables to like a taste good. It's like this is not like a good way to like describe it, but the soy meat is basically like the fake meat. But if you don't eat meat, but it's like for like a cooking, a lot of like the spices and the herbs, and for like a technique and the combination of like the food, but eating the vegetable is the sometimes it's better than eating the protein. So I'm trying to like making the process to taste too good for like the soy meat.
Okay, great.
But maybe like for 50 years later, like 100 years later, so it might be no choice, and we have to eat it, because like she said, the food is not enough for like all the people.
Okay. So Thomas touched upon the ocean, and that's something that Hiroko has been focused on to better protect the resources in the ocean. Can we talk about seafood and sustainable seafood then?
Yeah, as I told you, Japan, the situation in Japan is really bad. We have only 1/3 of the fish catch last year. And then depletion of the fishermen is really serious as well. It used to be like 70 million people. No, sorry. 70,000 people. No, 700,000 people. Sorry. Now it's like 1/6 of it. It's really, really small amount of people doing fishing. So in the near future, we can say that we don't have any good fish, good quality fish, and we have to import like sushi quality fish from abroad. That could happen. That kind of situation is happening, and it's really hard to say that we don't have any sustainable fish here, and we don't have any fish that to recommend the restaurants to use it. But what we're doing is that, what to say? So we can use the fish from the very small scale local fisherman who is treating the fish well. And then we don't use the fish from the purseine catch or something, the conventional fishing industry, because they are doing pretty bad, and they catch as much as possible because we don't have any regulations here yet. The fishermen can catch as much as they want. Compared to European countries or the States, they have some limits. This is called the TAC, the total amount of catch. That each species has TAC, TSC, but we don't have it. So fishermen can catch as much as possible. That's why the situation is really bad. So the only thing we can do is that the buy fish from the small scale fishermen. That's what we're doing.
Right. I understand that in the Atlantic Ocean, there's a better initiative to protect the resources from the sea, as far as, for example, tuna is concerned. Can you touch upon that, please?
Okay. There are two bluefin tunas in the world. One is Atlantic and one is Pacific. And the Atlantic tuna, and both tuna actually depleted heavily in the early 90s, I think. And after that, the Atlantic tuna had a very tight regulation. Then the fish stock came back really significantly. But in Pacific area, we have only 3% of bluefin tuna left, and it still continues because we don't have the very good regulation yet.
Thank you. So Thomas, what do you think about you mentioned that the quality of ingredients in Japan, especially the seafood. What do you think of the crisis that this country is facing in terms of the seafood?
I think, there was a question I wanted to ask later anyway, and I think the key word is rationing a lot of things. And not having an excess of ingredients on any level. I believe it was almost a few decades ago where on a very similar platform like what this platform is here, some of the most influential and smartest people on this planet have decided or agreed on everybody should have clean water on this planet to drink. And I think a similar question maybe should be raised here today, because I believe the answer is almost still the same, but the question is, should everybody actually have running water? Or should actually nobody have running water and water should be rationed? Because there's a lot of waste in that as well. And I think the same goes what you say is when it comes to seafood or when it comes to meat or any of that. When I grew up, there was still, and I don't even really remember, there was in the former DDR, we had once a week meat, which was on a Sunday, once a week fish, which was during the week, and then we were eating the leftovers, such as sauces, bread, and then, of course, there was cheese and those things. And I believe I just grew up fine with having once a week meat, for example, and once a week fish, and having a diet based around that. So going back to your question, again, it's rationing.
So rationing would mean, I guess, about an equal amount of food, seafood for everyone?
That would mean how much meat, or in that case, how much fish a week do I actually need? How much is actually wasted? Because that's also another big point you already mentioned in your introduction, and that's waste of food. And at the restaurant, we have started something which we call projects. And those projects take place once a week, where a group of people, 3 chefs and 1 front of house person, have to think creatively. And we have different subjects. One of the subjects we had for 1 month is food waste. Please come up with dishes where we use the food waste either for staff meal or which even goes to some extent in a bin. And it was extremely interesting to see what people actually are able to cook up with things we don't think of or never thought of it. And that also comes from a very different background to some extent. And now I'm not talking in names, I'm going to talk in nationalities, because that's also, again, I think a very similar question I raised before: why don't we eat insects in the Western world? So we had in Canadian, an American, and in Italian, were cooking a stew of fish heads, and they considered fish heads as waste. And a Korean said, well, I don't even know why this dish has been served here right now, because where I'm from, fish heads are actually a delicacy. So that's also something, again, as a restaurant, I think we can learn of. It's the interaction and sharing of knowledge between different cultures and backgrounds.
Are there anything, Fumio, that chefs should be doing to help with the issue of food wastage?
For the restaurant, actually, I don't know what you think about like the food waste of the restaurants. The restaurant doesn't really the wasting the food actually, because you know we know the the seats of the restaurants, and like, my restaurant have like a little more than 50 seats, and I know how much we need to order, and of course some stuff is going to leftover, but we have the shelf to using for like leftovers, or like like he said, like heads of the fish, or like sinew for like the beef, or like the protein, and sometimes a peel or like vegetables to making the stock, and like my restaurant goes like everything is a family meal. So then, but the family meal, sometimes the leftover, to using leftover the family meal to making the something else, and then we try to like not using for like any of the leftover the food. So that's the restaurant is. I think it's the most of the restaurant in Tokyo does the same things. Like I'm not trying to like waste of the food, but that's kind of like the culture things too. Like I'm 39 years old. Like when I was a kid, and my grandma was like sitting at like the front of me, and then I have to finish everything for like my plates. That's the cultures, like even like one piece of like the rice grain in the rice bowl. No, you have to eat it. Like that's you have to appreciate for the food. But I think that's the standard like for the Japanese culture. So, but if you go like the supermarket, or like for like a big venue, that's a different the situation, the problem.
Great. So Hiroko, what do you think from a journalist standpoint? Where does this, as Fumio said, if there's not much in restaurants per se that chefs can do, what are the other ways that chefs and other people involved in the food industry contribute to help reduce the food waste in general?
Yeah, okay. When I go around the restaurants and then have an interview with the people, and they always say they don't have much food waste, and I can agree. They can use it up for the family meal or staff meal, but at the same time, in European countries, they have compost at almost every restaurant, and then to put bits and pieces of skins or the fish head or whatever, to put in to, make it into the fertilizer and give it to the farms. And it makes a circular economy within that community. That can be possible here too, I suppose.
Are there any hurdles to doing that in Tokyo? Any difficulties that you can't do that?
I think the distance from the farm to restaurants, there's no way to send it out. and every restaurant is, very small, much smaller than the ones in Europe. So there's no room for them to do it. Maybe that's the problem. But if they have a smaller, size compost at every restaurant, we can support the organic farmers. We need some system, doing that though.
Right. Thank you. Well, one thing I wanted to kind of a little bit changing the angle. One thing that Hiroko you mentioned about the diminishing number of fishermen. There's sustainability of environment, but there's also a sustainability of a culture as making.
True.
Well, basically because we're talking about gastronomy, that's part of the culture, and that's almost art to me. And so there's now an aging population of producers in Japan, as far as, for example, meat is concerned, also the fishermen. And how do you see that? And that could be a disruptive force in maintaining the gastronomic culture in Japan. What do you think of that?
I think that's for like aging for like every single like for the farmers and the fishermen, and like it's when I visit the most of the places, it's pretty old. So then like when I think about like she said 2050 is going to be like a lot more people, but it's maybe like 10 or 15 years later for like a lot of the Japanese farmers, it's very like the serious situation. So I don't know what I can do like exactly, but I think it's for like the culture for the sustainabilities and for the farmers and the seafoods. The most important thing is like people knows this situation. For like the chef is of course, and the customers and everyone knows this situation. I think that's the first step. Then so then what are you gonna do? Like maybe if the farmer is making the pretty good amount of the money, then maybe like young people wants to be the farmers. But it's why the farmers the aging. It's why many people wants to be a farmers and a fisherman, because it's really hard. It's rules and maybe like not the bright futures. If you be the farmers, then do you think you have like a bright futures? The most of the people say it's no, and not no. Like it's really hard. But if you can change this like the whole, strategy, and maybe like the farmer can make the money, and it's not only for the money. It's like the one of the farmers then he said. He doesn't know my vegetables, what kind of people like eating my vegetables, what kind of people using for my vegetable. And then he came to my restaurants, and then I have your asparagus. I like your asparagus. I'm using for like this and this and this. And I made asparagus course for like my farmers. And he was like really, really happy for that. And he said, the most of the farmer has to visit to the restaurants and then has to maybe like go to the supermarket to see like the goal. So these people like eating and they're making for the happy smiles. That's give you like not only for the money wise. So then maybe like young people, I want to farm the vegetables and then the Thomas to use my vegetables. That's maybe like one of the goal. So maybe like that's the whole system could be like changing. So then. Like we can like protect the part of the culture too.
Thomas, what do you think? How can we help these small scale producers and also make the economics work for young people or new entrants to come into the market?
Well, I think again we are drifting a little bit away, but we knew that already when we talked about it. But it all starts with values, I believe, and I don't get me wrong, I consider myself as part of the society. The value is to be connected to the world, and that means having your iPhone. The values means that you can go on vacation. Value means to wear clothes And those values have been so big or become so big to us that we actually forget what are the values. And the values are to feed ourselves, because without food, we don't exist. So that's the reality. And without those farmers, there will be in the future a lot of problems as well. To, in fact, like what we said, leading up to whatever year, we will have problems to feed not just us, also the world population. So how can we make, you touched it already, put even more value into food, which means on a bigger scheme, food would become more expensive because along the line, the farmers are the people who need to get more money in order to make this profession again attractive for young people. But also, and that comes very much down to, again, to maybe us as chefs and using our restaurants as a platform, how can become farming or fishing a hip and cool thing to do, where young kids actually say, I wanted to become a farmer. I wanted to go out fishing because there's a beauty in it and there's a value from the society which says, you are a fisherman, thank you so much for getting up every day, 1 o'clock in the morning, when it's raining, when it's snowing, when the sea is flat or when it's stormy, and getting the fish or harvesting the food for us.
Yeah, Thomas, you mentioned a very important point about the pricing. I'm a foodie, and you guys are very international, so you probably realize that the food in Japan is like restaurant food, it's very cheap. It's a bargain, and that's one of the reasons why many of the inbound tourists they come to Japan to eat. It's not just because it's tasty, but it's cheap. If you compare with, especially with Western Europe or even in Asia, if you go eat street food in Asia, it's cheap. But if you want fine dining, gastronomy, then compare with top restaurants in Singapore or Seoul or wherever, Tokyo restaurants are cheap. And as a foodie myself, I'm a bit contradicting myself, I guess. But I think the restaurant prices need to be higher because because the current pricing is not sustainable given the issues that we just talked about. And so as Fumio said, as he said, information for people to know about these issues is very important because otherwise people will not accept higher pricing. They think it's just not fair because they were used to lower than they should be pricing. So for people to accept a higher pricing, they need reasons, and that's what these chefs and journalists can do to educate, so that people will even reluctantly come to an understanding that the prices need to be higher, and that's from a foodie standpoint. That's what I think.
Well, maybe I just jump in because I wanted to get it out as well. Again, you were mentioning in your introduction that 37% of the greenhouse emissions are being used from the food industry. And of course, I completely agree that it's an extremely high number. And would love to support to get this number down to 20, to 15, to 30, whatever we can do. But at the same time, what are the other 63% been used for? Because again, if it's not for us to feed us, what is more important than actually feeding us? Is it to go on holiday every day or once a year, or is it to make sure I'm wearing the clothes which are produced in America, or is it important to be connected with a cell phone which is produced somewhere else? I think I agree with you, but at the same time, you can also say it's actually a fairly low number because maybe in the future it will be much higher because we have to feed people which are in places where we have to fly. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, as expected, we've already run out of time. So, well, this is such a broad topic to discuss. But hopefully we kind of touched upon some of the issues that would get you more interested. So now we'd like to open up for questions. Okay. Okay, please.
I'm Tan from Singapore. Would the panel be able to comment on impossible food as well as beyond meat as part of the mega trend? Because earlier on you commented on alternative meats. And but the discussion is about disruption, it's about gastronomy. You know, Wolfgang Puck as well as Gordon Ramsay, they have already embraced impossible food. But just now in the earlier comments, you sort of dismissed alternative meats as if this is something not desirable. But I think it's part of the mega trend.
But why do we need it? Sorry.
Well,
Why-
to make the world more sustainable, so
Yeah,
that we can
but-
consume less water, less.
Of course. But
acreage.
why does it need to be artificial meat? Why can it not just be vegetables?
Because of the industrialization of the process, so that more people can consume instead of an original burger, we can have an impossible burger or beyond meat.
Yeah, but why does it need to be a burger? That's my question.
Or
Because
they are also into
I think on a
sausages?
very basic base, it's why do we need to make something look like beef, or why does it need something to be like meat? Why can we not have the same value to a soybean or to an enoki mushroom or to any seaweed which has its seasonality and its awareness, like a piece of red flesh?
Well, I think it has got to do with culture. I think in many cultures now, I think a hamburger is really a part of the diet.
I mean, I get your point, and because we're talking about gastronomy, we're talking about something that's really, kind of the,
We've gone
double
Park
circle,
and
right?
Gordon
But-
Ramsay.
Yeah, but for most people, many people in the world, they would definitely need something, that look like meat. So that's a big business, and that's why I said we're going to focus on gastronomy. But that's going to be a big business, I'm sure, and. Some of the chefs have already embraced it, while others will, continue not using it and go vegetables, basically, vegetarian. Some of the restaurants in the world are. So I guess that's a concurrent trend. Okay. Next question. We'll lead over there. Yeah.
I almost hate to ask this question because I know it's sensitive and it's a bit depressing. But how big of a concern is radiation from the Daiichi reactors from Fukushima? And what does the restaurant and the food industry think about the government's plan to start dumping that radioactive water within the next 5 years directly into the ocean? What will that do to your business? And what do you expect to do about it?
The lab test that is safe to throw away into the water. So what you see in the media is not true.
Okay. So is there any testing of radiation?
Yes.
Like I say, it would be good for us to know. Then that's my question exactly. What is the reality and how big of a concern is it?
Are there any concerns from the consumer's guest perspective?
Yeah,
you get that question?
For my case, it's only for like I can talk about for like my restaurants, and then I'm they connected like it's maybe like the 5 or 10 farmers, and in fact like I didn't have like a contact to like the Fukushima area as the farmers, but for like the customers. Not for right now, but it's when I used to work at the Jancho's restaurant, and then the couple customers that said, like, I don't want to eat the food from north of the Tokyo. So I want to eat like everything is from the west. So that's, like I can't say like yes and no, because for the Fukushima thing, it's actually, I can't taste. And I can't say yes or no. And all the information in for the right now, that's pretty much, I have to listen. And then, of course, like some chef doesn't want to use it, but some chef and wanted to support to like the farmers and the fishermen in Fukushima, so they wanted to use a lot of like stuff. But some chefs said no. So I don't know if this is not good answer or not. But for the sustainable seafood, the way the people does not use it for the the area for the Fukushima oceans. And for the seafood, if you're not catching for the seafood, the 3 years and the number is going to back. So like. I think that Katsukawa sensei, like the one of the professor in for like our not like the teacher, like the the spotter from the Chef for the Blue, that he said in unfortunately the Fukushima areas and fish is bring back to like it's very normal numbers.
Hiroko, you want to add on to that?
Yeah, actually, I really didn't investigate it too much, but I know some farmers from Fukushima area, and they all they all have some test, every week or something. It's really frequently they have to be checked, and then all of them are normal numbers. So I suppose that only the limited area is really affected, and the other area is okay, I suppose. But I'm sorry, that's the one I know. And the fish, as he said, after the earthquake, after the radiation thing, the fisheries stopped for almost a year, and the number of the fish came back. But I don't think many of the fishermen is actually going there because the fishing port is not really completed yet. So that kind of problem comes up later, I think, about fish. Yeah.
Thomas, what do you think? You have a lot of international guests, and would they ask questions about radiation?
Well, they don't ask questions. Of course, we ask the questions ourselves, and I'm not going to lie, we are trying to avoid seafood from those areas. And that's also very much based on, I feel very fortunate that in the restaurant we have a team of 3 people who are designated for, of course, purchasing food and also researching on it. And they tell me, Thomas, we have done our research. This one we should use, and this one we should avoid for now. And I trust their judgment and their research completely, and listen to their opinion, and of course do what they say.
Okay, thank you. Next section?
I have a mic.
Yeah, please.
Hi, Amanda Leland with Environmental Defense Fund. Thank you for all you guys are doing to make the world aware of the overfishing problem. And bringing chefs into that conversation is super important. I have 1,000 questions, but I'm going to limit it to one, which is your customers who are coming through your door, or the average consumer in Japan, balancing sustainability and gastronomy, do they care about more of sustainability, or do they care more about gastronomy? And do you see those trends changing, or how are you thinking about influencing those trends?
Okay, you want to go ahead?
Like they speak about like in the beginning, and for the Japanese people doesn't really care right now. So that's why like Japanese for the food sustainability in the mentality is like very much behind if you compare in Europe and US. So, and then I think I hate to say that, but that's kind of like including the chefs too. So when I joined to like Chefs for the Blue, I didn't know like anything, most of the like a reality for like ocean situation in Japan. But it's if I know, so this is the situation right now, and I have to do something, and what you can do. So that's, and at the same time, like I'm trying to like learning, and it's not like only for like stop using for the seafood. It's not like only for the goal. So that's we try to like the learning from like how what kind of fish we should use, and how I can tell to like a consumer and the customers, and this is a situation. I think for in Japan that's the basic, that try to like going to like another steps for that's the situation. So, and the question is that people like more care about the gastronomy, I guess, right now, unfortunately.
Okay. How about your real restaurant, Thomas?
Well, I think it's a mix, and also looking at my background, where I was coming from Copenhagen, there is a trend in gastronomy where I believe also that customers, sorry, we don't say customers, a guest in that case, they are start to listen, and they are start to do their research. how do we actually source and use our ingredients and where they are coming from. I can't give you a percentage. To some extent, even because my restaurant right now has more than 70% Japanese customers, and I don't have a direct word to my guest. But I would say the movement is clearly increasing, that people do their research and say, okay, they're saying they're using and sourcing their ingredients mainly sustainable grown, and those ones don't. I will see what they can do, because in the end of the day, it's also very interesting. Once you start sourcing sustainable, I mean, it's still almost a little bit like this hippie thing to do in the world of food. And sometimes hip is not always delicious. No, but that's the reality in many things. It's also with natural wines. There are some amazing ones, and there are some which are almost vinegar, let's be honest. And it's the same with food. So I think a lot of people are also very curious to look at or to see, okay, those guys, they do something meaningful, but let's see if it's actually delicious. Because at the end of the day, just because your approach to food is right, and just because you're working with the people who having the right approach, doesn't mean necessarily that the food is delicious, and you would never go back to a restaurant just because the approach is right, but the food is not right.
Well, I'd like to add from a foodie standpoint that, well, for most of us foodies, taste is obviously important. If it's not tasty, then I guess people would need to be forced to go to the restaurants. Otherwise, they wouldn't appreciate it. But if as long as the food is tasty, then as far as especially innovative restaurants like Thomas's are concerned, people care about story, and the background. They're just not there to taste good food. I mean, good food can be tasted anywhere in Japan. It's not difficult. People care more about story. So as Thomas said, where the ingredients come from and what the chefs believe in. And that's very important in the modern contemporary
Can I just jump in, please? Because again, and I'm very thankful that I was invited to this forum, because it made me think even more so. And then I'm also asking the question now, how much does it actually matter if your food has been grown sustainable, but nevertheless it gets put into a plastic bag, into another plastic bag, and gets sent to you? Because then all of a sudden, yes, you have organically grown vegetables, but whatever they've been sent in, it's not that organic, and then suddenly it goes back to the problem we have in the ocean. So when I was invited to this thing here, this was one of the major things what I couldn't get my head around it. So I tried to be plastic free for 2 weeks in Japan, and I can tell you it's a big challenge. And I lost almost 3 kilos. I was lucky enough, I'm working in a restaurant, so I feed myself in a restaurant. Nevertheless, sometimes you have to buy something, and when you go home 2 o'clock in the morning, whatever is left for you to grab is in a convenience store. And it's almost impossible to get anything not wrapped in plastic. So if you're wanting to lose weight, join the group and live plastic free for a few weeks.
Great, thank you. Maybe one last question?
Yeah, I think your overall message is that gastronomy is great in Japan, but sustainability is a real problem. And
That's right.
I want to ask you about the situation or challenges about farming, agriculture. Yeah, because it's also facing a serious problem of sustainability as an industry. And probably they need to be protected in some fashion, and also they need to become more profitable to remain sustainable. What's your view on that?
I mean, that's true. Like for agriculture, it has to be like more profitable than the younger people wants to be like the farmers. And for that case, what I can do is it's I'm trying to. I have like my restaurants like maybe like a 60-70% of like the produce is like for like my network for like mostly organic or like natural method to making for the produce, but the other 30-40% is like coming from the market. So it means it doesn't have to be like organic as well. So I think it's like try to get the produce directly from the farmers, and the farmers like the making the better in the prices to like sell to the restaurants. So I'm trying to like the support it that way. I think that's the only the way to like I can support to the farmers, because even like a 1 kilo like onions and like a 400 or 500 yen, and if I get like directly from the farmers, and the farmers actually making 400 or 500 yen for the onions, but if I get like Toyosu market, so that's already the couple like it's not like directly for the prices. So like I'm try to support the farmers to like directly their relationships.
Hiroko, you have relationship with farmers. What do you think?
It's okay. Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I think so too. The most of the farmers cannot get the much money from the retails, right? The direct buying from the source is the most important way for us restaurants. I don't know about. I cannot say anything about the retail. The whole retail markets, but as a restaurants, supporting those little small farmers by buying it directly, and also support them even if the harvest is not good time. They have to be supported, I think. Many restaurants are doing that actually. Even if the harvest is good or bad, they just keep buying it. Otherwise, they cannot make the money for the next season. Yeah.
Okay, great. We're about 2 minutes over time, but anything else you want to add? Okay, so we've run out of time, and hopefully next year we're going to have a few sessions on sustainability instead of just one, so that we could discuss this kind of things more in detail. Great. Thanks very much for participation. Thank you.